A little girl with cancer stood alone in the pouring rain, trying to sell flowers to buy her medicine. Each time she approached someone, she was ignored. But nothing could have prepared her for the contempt of a man who stepped out of a luxury car, looked at her with disgust, and muttered coldly, "Get out of the way. Sick kids shouldn't be on the street." What happened next would forever change both of their destinies. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. The rain lashed down on Main Street, turning the sidewalks into shimmering mirrors, reflecting the lights of the corporate buildings. Under the awning of a closed jewelry store, the girl tried to shield her small bouquet of wildflowers from the downpour. Her thin, pale fingers adjusted the woolen beanie that barely concealed her lack of hair. Every 3 minutes, a dry, hacking cough shook her frail body, forcing her to lean against the cold wall to keep from losing her balance. Across the street, the millionaire concluded a call inside his limousine. His stern face showed no emotion as he dictated orders to his assistant over the phone. "I don't care if they have families. If they don't vacate the premises by Friday, use any legal means necessary." Without waiting for a response, he ended the call abruptly. "We've arrived, sir," the driver announced, stopping the vehicle in front of the most imposing building on the avenue. A man in an impeccable suit opened the car door, unfurling a black umbrella to protect his boss. The millionaire adjusted his platinum watch, checking the time impatiently. He was 5 minutes late for the board meeting, unforgivable according to his own standards of excellence. As his Italian leather shoes touched the wet pavement, he saw the girl approaching. Something in her eyes, large, dark, and intensely alive, contrasting with her sickly appearance, made him hesitate for a split second. It was like looking at a ghost, but the hesitation quickly gave way to irritation. "Flower, mister. Just $5, she whispered, holding up the small bouquet hopefully. The man studied her for a moment. Her chapped lips, the deep circles under her eyes, the trembling in her hands. Everything about her screamed illness. He felt an inexplicable discomfort, as if something were scratching at a long-locked door within him. "Get out of the way! Sick kids shouldn't be on the street," he snapped coldly, pushing the bouquet away. The flowers fell into a puddle, their colorful petals scattering like tiny boats adrift. The girl showed no surprise. She merely bent down slowly to gather what she could, while the millionaire strode towards the building without looking back. On the 15th floor, he commanded the meeting with his usual surgical precision. Numbers, charts, acquisitions, layoffs. Everything flowed from his mouth with the calculated coldness that had made him famous in the business world. No one dared mention the slight tremor in his right hand as he signed the documents authorizing the demolition of a housing project to make way for a new luxury development. Meanwhile, the girl returned to the community shelter in the suburbs, her clothes soaked and the remaining wilted flowers held safely against her chest. "Tomorrow will be better," she murmured to herself, ignoring the fever that was beginning to burn her skin like embers. The morning dawned clear after the previous night's storm. The millionaire woke up in his triplex penthouse overlooking Central Park, exactly at 5:30 a.m., as he had done every day for over a decade. His movements were precise and automatic. 15 minutes on the treadmill, cold shower, black coffee without sugar, checking international stock quotes. The apartment, decorated with exclusive design pieces and contemporary art, looked more like an impeccable showroom than a home. There were no personal photographs, objects out of place, or any sign of human warmth. Only in a locked room, which even the cleaning staff was not allowed to enter, were there traces of a previous life, of when he still allowed himself to feel. "Your car will be ready in 10 minutes, sir," his assistant informed him over the intercom. "I'll be down in 5, he replied, adjusting his Italian silk tie in front of the mirror. For a moment, his grey eyes stared at his own reflection with strangeness, as if he no longer recognized the man who was staring back at him. At the community shelter, the night had been difficult for the girl. Her fever had risen so high that the coordinator almost took her to the hospital, but all the beds were occupied. As an alternative, they applied cold compresses and the few available medications to try to control her temperature. "I need to finish," the child murmured in her feverish delirium, trying to get out of the makeshift bed. "Finish what, sweetheart?" the volunteer asked, gently forcing her to stay lying down. "The box for the sad man," she replied, before falling back into restless sleep. In the morning, when the fever subsided slightly, she insisted so much that the coordinator finally gave in. With trembling hands, the girl cut out a piece of cardboard, colored it with the few crayons available in the shelter, and lined the inside with candy wrappers. Inside, she placed one of the crumpled flowers she had managed to save from the rain, and a note written in childish and irregular handwriting. "Who is this for?" the coordinator asked, while helping to close the box with already unsticky tape. "For the man in the big car, the one who looks like he forgot how to smile," the child replied with disarming simplicity. The coordinator hesitated, worried. She knew the girl's story and knew how much she had already suffered. Abandoned by her mother after her cancer diagnosis, she lost her father to a workplace accident months later. Since then, she had lived between public hospitals and the shelter, surviving on the kindness of strangers and small sales of flowers that she herself picked in the community garden. "Are you sure, after how he treated you?" she questioned, stroking the few strands of hair that still remained on the child's head. "He needs it more than I do," she replied with a wisdom that did not match her age. That afternoon, the millionaire was leaving a crucial meeting when he was approached in the lobby of the building by a simple woman in worn clothes and an apprehensive expression. "Excuse me, sir," she said, gathering her courage. "A little girl asked me to give this to you. She said it was important." Confused and annoyed by the interruption, he almost refused the clumsy package. Something, however, in the woman's determined gaze made him extend his hand and accept the small colored box. "Who sent this?" he asked, frowning. "The flower girl. The one you met in the rain yesterday," the woman replied, choosing her words carefully. A flicker of recognition crossed the millionaire's face, followed by an expression of discomfort. Without another word, he tucked the box into his inside coat pocket and headed to his car, ignoring the curious glances of his employees. All the way to his next meeting, he felt the weight of that box against his chest, as if he were carrying something far more significant than cardboard and tape. The millionaire spent the rest of the day on autopilot. Meetings, phone calls, multi-million-dollar decisions, it all seemed to happen on a distant plane, as if he were observing his own life through a thick glass wall. The colored box remained untouched on his desk, between a stack of contracts and his state-of-the-art laptop. "Any more appointments today?" his secretary asked at the end of the day, meticulously organizing the next day's schedule. "Cancel everything for tomorrow morning," he replied abruptly, surprising even himself with the decision. "But sir, the meeting with the Chinese investors." "Reschedule," he cut in, with a tone that brooked no argument. "Tell them a medical emergency came up." Something about the word medical made his eyes turn to the colored box. It wasn't an emergency, at least not in the conventional sense. However, he felt an inexplicable urgency that he hadn't experienced in years. When all the employees had left and the executive floor plunged into nocturnal silence, he finally allowed himself to open the unlikely gift. His fingers, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts without a tremor, now hesitated as he untied the small piece of twine that sealed the box. Inside, he found a crumpled flower, one of the same that the girl had been selling, and a handwritten note with childish and irregular handwriting. "You treated me like nobody, but I wanted to give you what my dad gave me when I was scared, a flower. He died before I started treatment. I don't know if I'll live long, but I wanted someone to know that, even sick, I tried to spread love. Maybe you need it more than I do." The millionaire felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. He read the note a second time, then a third. Each word seemed to pierce the armor he had built around himself since the tragedy that transformed his life. Involuntarily, his eyes went to the small key that he always carried with him, hanging along with his office keys. The key to the locked room in his apartment, the room of the son he had lost 8 years ago in a car accident. His hands began to tremble. He, who commanded financial empires without showing emotion, now struggled to contain an avalanche of long-repressed feelings. With a brusque movement, he threw the box into the drawer and locked it, as if he could thus contain what had been awakened inside him. On the way home, he ordered the driver to make a detour to the children's hospital on the east side, the most underfunded in the city, where the girl was probably being treated. The driver looked at him with astonishment in the rearview mirror, but dared not question him. "Stop here," he ordered when they arrived at the hospital. "Wait in the car." For the first time in years, he walked alone through the streets, without security, without assistance. The hospital, a worn building with visible lines even at that late hour, was the complete opposite of the aseptic and luxurious environments he frequented. At the reception desk, his questions sounded strange, even to himself. "A little girl who sells flowers. Is she being treated here?" The receptionist, tired after a long shift, looked at him indifferently. "We have many children here, sir. Without a name, without a record, I can't help you." Frustrated, the millionaire returned to the car, feeling powerless for the first time in a long time. Neither his money nor his influence seemed useful at that moment. In his apartment, instead of heading to the master bedroom, his steps led him to the ever-locked door. With hesitant fingers, he turned the small key in the lock and opened the door to a world frozen in time, his son's room, exactly as it was on the day of the accident. There, on the dresser, between sports trophies and toys, was a photo. His son, smiling, holding a wildflower identical to the one he had received from the unknown girl. A coincidence that made his heart, so long dormant, give a painful leap in his chest. Even before dawn, the millionaire was already awake after a sleepless night populated by faces of the past and present that mingled in disturbing dreams. The crumpled flower from the box now rested in a glass of water on his bedside table, a surreal contrast to the minimalist and impersonal decor of the room. He dismissed the breakfast meticulously prepared by the housekeeper and left without notifying the security team. He took one of his less ostentatious cars and drove himself to the city center, parking near the place where he had met the girl 2 days before. The avenue, at that time of the morning, was beginning to awaken with its first passers-by, early rising workers, delivery people, homeless people collecting their belongings after another night in the open. No sign of the little flower seller. For 3 hours, he walked the adjacent streets, asking street vendors, guards, even the homeless. Some looked at him with suspicion, a clearly wealthy man asking about a sick child. Others simply shook their heads, too busy with their own survival to notice the details of other people's lives. It was an elderly shoe shiner who finally gave him a clue. "The bald flower girl? She stays at the St. Clair shelter when she's not in the hospital. Poor thing, they say she's gotten worse these days." The shelter was on the outskirts, in a district that the millionaire knew only as numbers on real estate investment spreadsheets. He drove for almost an hour through increasingly narrow and dilapidated streets until he found the small exposed brick building with a faded sign. The contrast between his imported car and the surroundings was so glaring that it attracted curious and some hostile glances. For the first time in years, he felt exposed, vulnerable. He parked and walked to the entrance of the shelter, where a middle-aged woman was sweeping the sidewalk. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound casual. "I'm looking for a little girl. She sells flowers downtown. She has health problems." The woman studied him with experienced eyes that seemed to see beyond the expensive suit and the rigid posture. "You're the man in the big car, aren't you? She talked about you." Something in the way she said that, without accusation, but with disconcerting clarity, made the millionaire feel transparent. "I came to see how she is," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "Too late for visits," the woman replied with a heavy sigh. "She's been hospitalized since last night. The fever wouldn't break, and she started having trouble breathing." "Which hospital?" he asked, already pulling his cell phone out of his pocket, ready to activate his network of contacts. "East Side General. But I doubt you'll be able to see her. The pediatric ICU is restricted even for us from the shelter." ICU. The acronym landed like a weight on his shoulders. He knew medical emergencies. He knew hospital corridors and waiting rooms. He knew the desperation of waiting for news while doctors fought to save a life. Without saying goodbye, he returned to the car and sped towards the hospital, making calls as he drove. He activated his lawyer, his personal physician, contacts in the health department. For the first time in years, he was using his power not to destroy or acquire, but to try to reach someone who, for reasons he didn't yet fully understand, had become important. At the hospital, the receptionist recognized him immediately. His face regularly graced business magazines and society columns. Before she could speak, a doctor appeared, clearly alerted by someone about his arrival. "Sir, I understand your concern, but the visiting rules." "I don't just want to visit her," the millionaire interrupted, with the tone he used to close difficult deals. "I want to assume all the costs of her treatment. I want to transfer her to the best specialized clinic. Today." The doctor blinked, surprised by the vehemence. "Are you related to the child?" The question caught him off guard. No, he wasn't related. He was just a stranger who had treated her with cruelty days before. A stranger who, for some inexplicable reason, felt connected to her through a crumpled flower and a note written in a trembling hand. "I'm responsible for her from now on," he declared, with a firmness that brooked no argument. The doctor hesitated, then nodded slowly. "In that case, we need to talk about her condition, and there are documents to be filled out." As he followed the doctor through the crowded corridors of the public hospital, the millionaire felt his cell phone vibrate in his pocket. Probably his team, panicking about his sudden disappearance. He ignored it. For the first time in years, something more important than business occupied his thoughts. Through the glass of the ICU, he finally saw her. So small and fragile in the hospital bed, connected to tubes and monitors, paler than on the rainy day of their first encounter. And yet there was something in her, even unconscious, even fighting for her life, that radiated a strength he had forgotten existed in the world. 3 days passed like a whirlwind in the millionaire's life. The business world went into an uproar with his sudden departure. Stocks plummeted on the stock market with rumors about his mental health, and his board of directors called emergency meetings. None of it seemed to matter. With the efficiency that characterized him in business, he organized the girl's transfer to St. Peter's Clinic, the most advanced oncology center in the country. He mobilized international specialists, hired exclusive nurses, and settled into a suite next to the room where she was recovering. "The tests show advanced stage leukemia," the chief oncologist explained, showing results on a high-definition screen. The treatment in the public system was irregular, with harmful intervals between chemotherapy sessions due to lack of availability. The millionaire listened with meticulous attention, taking notes as if he were in a crucial business meeting. In a way, he was. He was now negotiating against time, against death. "What are the odds?" he asked directly, as he always did. The doctor hesitated. He wasn't used to such frankness. "With the protocol we're implementing, maybe 40%. It would be higher if we had started sooner. 40%. In his business, he would never accept such unfavorable odds. But there, at that moment, he clung to that number as if it were the most promising of prospects. Then we'll make the 40% turn into 60, he declared, with the same conviction he used to predict market trends. On the 5th day, while working remotely from the makeshift room in the hospital, he heard a movement in the room next door. He jumped up, knocking the cup of coffee over important documents without even noticing. The girl had awakened, confused, frightened by the luxurious environment and the sophisticated equipment. She was trying to sit up in bed when he entered the room. For a moment, they were silent, observing each other. She, connected to monitors and IV drips, seemed even smaller and more fragile under the hospital lights. He, without his usual suit, wearing only dress pants and a rumpled 2-day-old shirt, seemed less intimidating. "You got my flower," she said finally, her voice hoarse from the recent intubation. It wasn't a question, but a statement, as if somehow she always knew he would come. "I did," he confirmed, approaching the bed cautiously. "Why did you give it to me?" The question came out more vulnerable than he intended. This wasn't how he normally spoke. Direct, imperative, with no room for interpretations. But in front of those childish eyes that seemed to see through all his layers of protection, he felt strangely exposed. "Because you looked sad," she replied simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Sadder than me, and I have cancer." A weak smile lit up her face for an instant. The millionaire felt something rare, the urge to smile in response. He restrained himself, still uncomfortable with the intimacy of the situation. "What's your name?" he asked, realizing that he still didn't know her name, despite having signed dozens of documents about her. The girl said her name, the same name that his son had carried. The coincidence hit him like a punch to the stomach. He needed to lean on the edge of the bed to keep from staggering. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing his sudden paleness. "Nothing," he lied, recovering his composure. "I just haven't eaten right today." She studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed much older than her child's body. "You should take better care of yourself, you know? My dad always said that we only have one life to live." Her dad, the man mentioned in the note, dead before the start of her treatment. Another painful coincidence. He also hadn't been there for his son when he needed him most. "Your father seemed like a wise man," he commented, sitting in the chair next to the bed. "The wisest in the world," she confirmed, with the absolute loyalty of a child. "He gave me a flower every day before he went to work. He said it was so I'd always remember that beautiful things can grow in the hardest places." How long had it been since he had cried? 8 years, 3 months, and 16 days since his son's funeral. Embarrassed, he tried to disguise it, but the girl extended her small, pale hand, touching his face with the delicacy of someone touching a soap bubble. "It's okay to cry," she consoled. "My dad cried sometimes too, when he thought I was sleeping." That simple childish touch, that permission to feel, triggered something the millionaire had kept locked up for almost a decade. Unable to contain it any longer, he let the tears flow freely, while the small, fragile hand held his, offering strength to someone everyone considered unshakable. The following weeks brought a completely new routine for the millionaire. In the morning, he participated in the most urgent meetings via video conference. In the afternoon, he accompanied the girl's treatments, learning medical terms and oncology protocols with the same dedication he had once reserved for market analyses. At night, he sat next to her bed and, breaking decades of reserved habits, read stories, talked, or simply stayed silent when she was too tired to interact. His corporate team was in a panic. Shareholders questioned his sanity. Tabloids speculated about his midlife crisis or late-in-life religious awakening. No one understood how a man known for his calculated coldness could suddenly dedicate himself so intensely to an unknown child. "Sir, we need your signature for the closing of the Northeast construction acquisition," his assistant insisted during a visit to the hospital. "The deadline is today." "Cancel it," he replied distractedly, while watching the nurse prepare the girl's medication. Cancel it? But we've been working on this deal for almost a year. The investors will... I said cancel it, he repeated, without taking his eyes off the medical procedure. That land has an orphanage, doesn't it? We're not demolishing it anymore. In fact, schedule a meeting with the legal team. I want to create a foundation to renovate the place. The assistant stared at him as if he had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. She left shaking her head, muttering about consulting the family lawyer about a possible judicial intervention. That afternoon, while the girl slept after a particularly difficult chemotherapy session, the head doctor asked to speak with the millionaire in private. I'd like to discuss something with you, the doctor began, with a serious expression. I've noticed that you and the patient have the same blood type, which is quite rare. We did some routine additional tests and... The doctor hesitated, as if searching for the right words. And, pressed the millionaire, impatient as he had always been. And we discovered some unusual genetic coincidences. So unusual that I felt obligated to investigate further. The doctor opened a folder with test results. Her DNA profile presents markers that indicate a possible family relationship with you. The world seemed to freeze around the millionaire. Are you suggesting that she's my relative? Impossible. I have no family beyond distant cousins. The doctor seemed uncomfortable. Actually, the markers indicate a first-degree relationship, like a sibling or a child. Absurd, the millionaire cut in, standing up abruptly. My only son died 8 years ago. I understand, said the doctor, remaining calm. But would it be possible, perhaps, that your son left behind a child? Her age would correspond. The suggestion hit the millionaire like a lightning bolt. His son had been only 17 years old when he died. A teenager, a model student, a promising athlete, a responsible kid. At least that's what he thought. My son didn't have a steady girlfriend, he murmured, more to himself than to the doctor. The coincidences are many, continued the doctor gently. Same rare blood type, compatible genetic markers. Her age corresponds precisely to a conception shortly before his passing. And there's the name. The name, repeated the millionaire in a low voice. The same name, not a tribute to the boy as he had initially thought, but the name that his son would have chosen, perhaps? Suddenly, memories began to emerge. His son, more quiet in the last months of his life, requests to use the car on weekends for school projects, a discussion about responsibility that they never got to finish because he had an important meeting abroad. There's one last detail, added the doctor, interrupting his tumultuous thoughts. Her birth certificate. The father's name is registered, but he never legally acknowledged paternity. It's your son's name. The millionaire took the document with trembling hands and read the name printed on the paper. There was no more denying it. There was the proof. The girl was his granddaughter. An avalanche of contradictory emotions overwhelmed him. Shock, denial, anger for not having been informed, guilt for all the lost years, and finally, an overwhelming sense of connection that explained the inexplicable impulse he had felt upon receiving that simple crumpled flower. Does she know? He asked, his voice almost inaudible. I believe not, replied the doctor. From what I understand from the social workers, she lived with her mother until she was 5, when the symptoms of the disease began. The mother abandoned her in the hospital and disappeared. Her father, your son, had already passed away, and she went to live with her maternal grandfather, who also passed away recently. Since then, she has been moving between the hospital and the shelter, a story of abandonment after abandonment, and he, unknowingly, had been another one to reject her on that rainy day. Don't tell her yet, he decided, running a hand over his tired face. I need to process this and find the best time. What began as rumors in the corporate corridors soon reached the press, hungry for stories about the personal life of the habitually discreet businessman. Tycoon abandons business for mysterious girl, announced the headline of a sensationalist magazine. Crisis of conscience or marketing strategy? Questioned another. The millionaire's lawyer rushed into his makeshift office at the clinic, carrying a stack of newspapers and tablets with news stories. "We need to issue an official statement," he said, visibly disturbed. "The speculation is out of control. Some are insinuating that you're mentally unstable. Others suggest this is a maneuver to divert attention from some imminent financial scandal." The millionaire barely lifted his eyes from the medical reports he was studying. "Let them talk. Your ex-wife has filed a request for psychiatric re-evaluation, claiming that your erratic behavior puts the family business at risk. The board of directors is considering a temporary removal." That finally caught his attention. "They can't remove me from my own company." "Actually, they can, based on the agreement you yourself drafted after your son's death when you weren't at your best emotionally." The irony was not lost on him. At the time, he had created that clause, thinking of protecting the empire he had built from his own decisions, should he sink back into the depression that had almost destroyed him. Now that same clause was being used against him precisely when, for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. "We have another issue," continued the lawyer uncomfortably. "The girl's mother has shown up." "What?" The millionaire jumped up. "Where has she been all these years? Apparently she remarried, has other children. One of the tabloids found her and offered her money for her story. She's claiming that you kidnapped her daughter, preventing contact." "That's absurd. She abandoned her own daughter with cancer." "Yes, but legally she still has custody. The shelter only had temporary guardianship. If she decides to take this to court..." The millionaire felt an icy fury run through his veins. "How much does she want?" The lawyer sighed. "It's not just money this time. She wants exposure, fame. She's already been photographed crying in front of the hospital, claiming that they won't let her see her daughter." At that moment, a nurse knocked on the door. "Sir, the patient is asking for you. The fever is back and she's a little agitated." The millionaire looked at the lawyer. "Buy me time. Do whatever it takes, but keep that woman away from here. And as for the board, schedule an emergency meeting for tomorrow. I'll handle this personally." In the boardroom, the atmosphere was one of palpable tension. On one side of the table, the entire board of directors, men and women in suits that the millionaire had personally selected over the years. On the other, only him, with deep circles under his eyes and the same suit he had been wearing for 2 days. "We understand your personal situation," began the chairman of the board, choosing his words carefully. "But the shareholders are worried. Stocks have fallen 12% in the last week. Clients are hesitant to close new deals. We need stability." "Stability," repeated the millionaire with a cold smile. "That's what I've built over the last 20 years, a company stable enough to function perfectly for a few weeks without my constant presence." "It's not just your absence," interrupted another director. "It's your recent decisions, cancelling the acquisition of Northeast Construction at the last hour, suspending the shopping mall project, donating to charities without consulting the social responsibility department. This isn't you." The millionaire observed those familiar faces, realizing for the first time how much of the real him these people really knew. "You're right," he said finally. "It's not who I've been in recent years. But maybe it's who I should have been from the beginning." He opened his folder and distributed documents around the table. "Here's my proposal. The foundation I mentioned formalized. We're going to redirect 30% of annual profits to children's health programs, starting with the complete renovation of the pediatric ward at Eastside General." A murmur of dismay ran through the room. "This is insane," protested the CFO. "The shareholders will sue us." "The shareholders will receive a fair return," countered the millionaire, "just not as obscene as they were accustomed to. As for those who don't agree," he paused significantly, "I have enough capital to buy their shares at market price. Today." The silence that followed was thick enough to be cut with a knife. "Why are you doing this?" asked finally an older director who had known him since the beginning of his career. "What does that girl mean to you?" For a moment, the millionaire considered revealing the truth, that the child was his granddaughter, the last link to the son he had lost. But something stopped him. The relationship between them went beyond blood ties. It was something deeper, almost spiritual, that was born the moment he received that simple, crumpled flower. "She reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago," he replied simply. "That building things is more meaningful than destroying them." Meanwhile, at the clinic, the girl was facing her own battle. The fever persisted, signaling an infection that the doctors were trying to combat aggressively. Semi-conscious, she murmured disconnected words, occasionally calling for her father or the millionaire. A nurse was adjusting the IV drip when she noticed an unknown woman sneaking into the room. "Excuse me, ma'am, who are you?" "Unauthorized visitors can't enter here." The woman, well-dressed but with excessive makeup and a nervous expression, forced a smile. "I'm her mother. I came to see her." "I wasn't informed about this," replied the nurse suspiciously. "I'll need to check with the attending physician and with Mr." She hesitated, not knowing how to refer to the millionaire. "Oh, sure, the rich man who kidnapped my daughter," said the woman, raising her voice purposefully. "Who forbade her own mother from seeing her." The girl stirred in bed, disturbed by the shouting, her feverish eyes trying to focus on the source of the disturbance. "Please lower your voice," asked the nurse. "The patient needs tranquility." "Tranquility? She needs her mother," insisted the woman, approaching the bed. "Honey, it's me. Mommy's back." The girl's reaction was immediate and shocking. Her entire body tensed up, the heart monitor spiked, and a scream of pure terror escaped her parched lips. "Get out!" ordered the nurse, pressing the emergency button. "Security!" When the millionaire returned to the clinic after the meeting with the board, he found a chaotic scene. Doctors and nurses rushed in and out of the girl's room, and 2 security guards escorted a hysterical woman out of the building. "What happened?" he asked, feeling his heart race with fear. The head doctor approached with a grave expression. "The biological mother managed to get in. The patient had a severe panic attack that compromised her already weakened system. We had to sedate her." "How is she now?" "Stabilized, but..." The doctor hesitated. "The emotional stress complicated her condition. We need to consider more aggressive treatment options, maybe even a bone marrow transplant if we can find a compatible donor." In just one day, everything seemed to crumble. The company, his granddaughter's health, the threat of the mother who had abandoned her own daughter and now returned, not out of love, but out of self-interest. He entered the room and found the girl asleep from the sedatives, paler and more fragile than ever. He sat next to the bed and, for the second time since meeting her, allowed himself to cry, not just for her, but for the entire web of loss, pain, and lies that connected them. It was then that he made a decision. No matter the personal, professional, or financial cost, he wouldn't lose her. Not again. The morning dawned grey and cold, reflecting the millionaire's state of mind as he waited in the examination room. In the last week, he had done something he never imagined. He relinquished control. He temporarily delegated the presidency of the company to his most trusted vice president, hired an army of lawyers to deal with the girl's biological mother, and, most importantly, underwent a battery of medical tests. "The results confirm it, sir," the doctor announced, entering the room with a folder of documents. "You're a match for bone marrow donation. Not completely ideal, as a sibling would be, but compatible enough for us to proceed with the transplant." A sigh of relief escaped the millionaire's lips. As a biological grandfather, there was a chance of compatibility, but it wasn't guaranteed. The fact that he was a viable donor seemed in some way a reparation that the universe offered, a chance to save the granddaughter he couldn't save his son. "When can we perform the procedure?" he asked, already rolling up his sleeve, as if he were ready to donate at that instant. "First, we need to prepare the patient. Intensive chemotherapy to destroy the diseased marrow will begin today. The transplant itself will take place in approximately 10 days. And the chances of success? The doctor hesitated, as they always did before that difficult question. With a partially compatible donor and considering the advanced state of the disease, between 50 and 60%. But without the transplant, it wasn't necessary to complete the sentence. Without the transplant, there would be no chance. The millionaire, accustomed to calculating risks in business, was now making the most important calculation of his life. And any percentage above zero was enough to move forward. That night, he sat next to the girl's bed, who was more alert after a few days of intensive treatment. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked abruptly, with that childish frankness that always disarmed him. "You didn't even know me." This was the moment he could tell her the truth, reveal the blood tie that united them. But something inside him hesitated. What if she was disappointed? What if she felt that he was helping her only because of family obligation, not because of who she was? "I knew someone like you a long time ago," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "My son. He had your same name. Did you know that?" The girl's eyes widened. "Really? And where is he now?" "He died 8 years ago in a car accident. He was going to meet someone important. I never knew who." The girl absorbed the information in silence. Then, with a wisdom that seemed to transcend her age, she reached out and touched his arm. "I think I know who he was going to meet," she said softly. The millionaire felt his heart skip a beat. "Who?" "My mom," she replied, with a devastating simplicity. "Before she abandoned me at the hospital, she was drunk and said that my dad was a rich kid who died before I was born. That's why nobody wanted me." The words hit the millionaire like a tsunami. She knew. Somehow, even without fully understanding, she sensed the connection between them. "She was wrong," he said finally, holding her small hand in his. "Someone wants you. I do." The next day, a team of social workers and child psychologists helped him explain the complete truth to the girl, that he was her biological grandfather, that his son, her father, probably never knew about the pregnancy before he died, that now they were, in fact, family. Her reaction was surprising. Instead of shock or confusion, she demonstrated a serene acceptance, as if she had always known, on some intuitive level, that there was a deeper bond between them. "So that's why you changed when you got my flower," she concluded with a small smile. "You felt it." "I did," he confirmed, marveling at her perception. In the following days, as she prepared for the transplant with intensive chemotherapy sessions, the millionaire rarely left her side. He read stories, played simple games when she had energy, or simply held her hand when nausea and discomfort overwhelmed her. For someone who had spent decades building walls around himself, it was a total and unconditional surrender. The news that a powerful businessman had discovered a granddaughter and was now fighting to save her from cancer quickly replaced the negative speculation in the media. Public opinion, once critical, embraced the story of redemption and second chances. Even the board of directors relented, realizing the humanitarian potential of the situation. The biological mother, confronted with evidence of abandonment and neglect, and facing the possibility of criminal charges, accepted a settlement that included relinquishing all parental rights in exchange for financial compensation and a guarantee that her identity would be protected from the media. On the eve of the transplant, the millionaire found himself alone in his granddaughter's room, who was finally asleep after a particularly difficult day of treatment. Looking at that childish face marked by illness, but still radiant with an inexplicable inner strength, he felt simultaneously small and giant, small before her courage, giant in his determination to do anything to save her. He took out the crumpled flower she had given him, now dry, but carefully preserved in a small crystal box that he had made. He placed it on the bedside table, next to dozens of other fresh flowers that he brought her daily, fulfilling the promise that his son could not keep. "We're going to make it," he promised in a low voice, adjusting the blanket over her delicate shoulders. "Tomorrow begins our real story." As he left to prepare for his own donation procedure the next day, he didn't notice the small smile that formed on the girl's lips, seemingly asleep. A smile of someone who, after so much darkness, finally found light. The day of the transplant dawned clear, as if the universe itself was making way for the light to enter. The procedures began early. First, the collection of bone marrow from the Millionaire, a painful process that he faced without any anesthesia beyond the local, wanting to remain lucid and present in every moment. "Donors are usually quite debilitated after the procedure," commented the nurse, impressed to see him get up as soon as the doctors finished the extraction. "You should rest." "I'll rest when she's safe," he replied, dressing quickly, ignoring the throbbing pain in his back and hips from where the marrow had been extracted. In the transplant room, the medical team prepared the girl. After days of intensive chemotherapy to destroy her compromised marrow, she was extremely vulnerable, defenseless. Every minute represented a risk of fatal infection. Her small body seemed even more fragile against the white hospital sheets, connected to monitors and equipment that formed a technological symphony trying to maintain life where nature failed. "Grandpa," she called weakly, spotting the Millionaire at the door. It was the first time she had used that word, simple, powerful, transformative. Something inside him broke and rebuilt simultaneously at the sound of those two syllables. Ignoring the doctor's protests about sterilization protocols, he approached wearing only the mask and gloves hastily provided by a nurse. "I'm here," he said, holding her tiny hand in his. "And the part of me that they're going to put in you will be in there soon too." She smiled, despite the pain and fear. "So I'm going to be part Millionaire too?" The unexpected joke drew laughter from the tense medical team and tears from the grandfather's eyes. Even on the edge of the abyss, she found the strength to illuminate the environment. "The richest part of me," he confirmed, gently squeezing her fingers before the doctors insisted that he needed to step away for the start of the procedure. The following hours were the longest of the Millionaire's life, surpassing even the terrible wait during the accident that had taken his son's life. Each minute stretched into an eternity as he watched through the glass of the procedure room, the liquid that contained his bone marrow, his vital essence, slowly flowing into his granddaughter's body. "Now the real battle begins," explained the oncologist when it was all over. "The next few days are critical. There's a risk of rejection, infection, complications." "She'll make it," affirmed the Millionaire with a certainty that brooked no argument. It wasn't hope or faith, it was an iron determination, as if he could bend reality to his will, just as he had done so many times in the business world. The days that followed formed a blur of vigils, medical bulletins, moments of panic when the fever spiked, and periods of cautious hope when the first signs of engraftment appeared. The Millionaire slept in a recliner next to the girl's bed, refusing to go home even when his own health began to worry the medical team. "You won't help your granddaughter by getting sick too," warned the doctor, noticing his paleness and exhaustion. "I won't get sick," he replied with the same absolute conviction, as if his body wouldn't dare disobey a direct command from his will. On the 7th day after the transplant, while the girl was sleeping, he received an unexpected visit. An elderly lady, modestly dressed, waited in the hallway of the clinic. "You don't know me," she said nervously. "I'm the mother of the woman who abandoned your granddaughter." The Millionaire felt his body stiffen, preparing for another clash, another threat to the fragile balance he was fighting to maintain. "What do you want?" he asked directly, without mincing words. "I didn't come to cause trouble," the lady hastened to explain. I never knew that my daughter had abandoned the child. She told me the girl had died years ago. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face. I only found out the truth now with these news reports on television. She held out a simple paper bag. I brought these. They're things from the beginning of her life. Some photos, the crib blanket, and this. She pulled out a small, worn teddy bear. It was her favorite. The millionaire looked at those objects, evidence of an early life he didn't know. Photographs of his granddaughter as a baby, precious records of a lost time. He felt his throat tighten. I want you to know, continued the lady, that not everyone in her family abandoned her by choice. My daughter has always had problems, but I would have taken care of her if I had known. For a moment, the powerful businessman saw himself reflected in the eyes of that simple grandmother, both deprived of the company of their granddaughter by circumstances beyond their control, both carrying the weight of what-ifs that could never be answered. Thank you, he said finally, accepting the bag. There was no more anger, just a silent understanding of what they both had lost. That night, when the girl woke up briefly, he showed her the teddy bear. Her eyes lit up with recognition. "Mr. Hugs!" she exclaimed with more energy than she had shown in days. "I thought about him sometimes, but I thought he was left behind, like everything." "He found his way back to you," replied the grandfather, placing the old toy in her arms. "Just like I did." A week later, the doctors confirmed what the millionaire already knew in his heart. The transplant was taking hold. The transplanted cells were beginning to produce new, healthy blood cells. The battle wasn't entirely won. The road to recovery would be long, but the most important war had been won. "We got lucky," commented the head doctor. "It wasn't luck," countered the millionaire, watching his granddaughter, who was now sleeping peacefully, with color gradually returning to her face. It was determination. Hers, mostly. That afternoon, while the girl felt strong enough to sit up in bed and browse through a book, he finally allowed himself to ask the question that had been tormenting him for weeks. "If you get completely better," he began, hesitant. "When you get better, would you like to come live with me, officially as my granddaughter?" She lowered the book slowly, looking at him with that intensity that always disconcerted him. "You won't get tired of me?" she asked, revealing the fear of abandonment that years of rejection had ingrained. "Never," he promised, holding her small hands. "You're my family, the only one I have left, the only one that matters." She thought for a moment, then smiled, that smile that illuminated everything around her. "Then yes, but with one condition." "Anything," he replied readily. "You have to smile more, and take me to see the ocean when I can leave here. I've never seen the ocean." "Those are two conditions," he observed, with a smile that weeks ago would have seemed impossible on his face. "I'm a tough negotiator," she retorted with a mischievous wink. At that moment, sitting in that hospital room that had been the scene of so much pain and hope, something sacred formed between them. A silent promise of a future that just weeks before seemed impossible for both. 6 months had passed since the transplant. Spring covered the city with vivid colors, as if celebrating the rebirth that was occurring not only in nature, but also in the lives of the girl and her grandfather. The millionaire's mansion, once a monument to solitude and cold minimalism, had completely transformed. The room that had remained locked for 8 years, the untouched sanctuary of his deceased son, was now open and renovated. No longer a mausoleum of painful memories, but a shared space where both the past and the present could coexist. There, between preserved sports trophies and childhood toys, emerged colorful drawings, children's books, and new photographs. The grandfather and granddaughter on their first day home after being discharged from the hospital. The two on the beach, fulfilling the promise made in the hospital. The girl blowing out candles on her birthday, with thin hairs beginning to grow back as signs of victory over the disease. On that sunny morning, the millionaire, who was never late for appointments, quietly watched his granddaughter playing in the mansion's garden. The gardener, who had initially received with astonishment the instructions to create a space more cheerful and less formal, now smiled as he watched the girl running among the wildflowers that he had planted especially for her. "Grandpa, look!" she called, holding up a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Just like the ones I used to sell." He smiled, still marveling at the miracle of hearing her call him that. His phone vibrated, probably his assistant reminding him of the inauguration scheduled for that afternoon. He ignored it, focused on the present moment. "They're more beautiful," he commented, bending down to her level, "because they're alive in the ground, not cut." Like people, she reflected with that wisdom that always surprised him. Happier when they can grow in the right place. He nodded, touched by the depth of that simple observation. She was growing, not only physically recovering her vigor after months of intensive treatment, but also in spirit and intellect. The private tutor he had hired constantly commented on her sharp intelligence and creativity. "Are you ready for today?" he asked, adjusting the colorful beanie that she still wore. Less out of necessity and more out of taste, decorated with brooches and ribbons. "Nervous," she admitted. "What if the other kids don't like me?" "Impossible," he assured her, picking her up in his arms with an ease that would have seemed inconceivable to the man he was a year ago. "You're the easiest person to love I've ever met." Hours later, they stood before a modern and welcoming building, surrounded by reporters and authorities. The sign at the entrance read, "Flower of Hope Institute, Treatment and Support Center for Children with Cancer." Below, in smaller letters, "No Child Left Behind." It was the project that had consumed a good part of the millionaire's fortune and all of his time in recent months. A state-of-the-art pediatric oncology treatment center with the capacity to serve hundreds of children, regardless of the financial condition of their families. "Nervous?" asked the granddaughter, reversing the roles as she held his hand. "A little," he confessed, adjusting his tie, no longer the perfect knot of before, but something more relaxed, just like his entire demeanor. "Don't worry," she consoled. "You just need to speak from the heart, like you do with me." The photographers positioned themselves. The dignitaries awaited anxiously for the speech of the businessman who, in less than a year, had transformed from a symbol of relentless ambition to a dedicated philanthropist. On the podium, with his granddaughter at his side, the millionaire set aside the speech meticulously prepared by the press office. He looked at the crowd and, for the first time in his life, spoke without calculations or strategies. "A year ago, I was a different man. I believed that success meant accumulating power, money, influence. I built skyscrapers, but I lived in an invisible prison, the prison of indifference." He paused, looking at his granddaughter, who smiled encouragingly. "Then, on a rainy day, a courageous child offered me a flower. And it changed everything." He then told the story, not just the version that the media knew about the unexpected discovery of a granddaughter, but the deeper truth about how a simple offer of unconditional love had melted years of bitterness and isolation. "This institute isn't about me or my family," he concluded. "It's about every child who fights against cancer and every family that suffers together. It's about ensuring that no child needs to sell flowers in the rain to buy medicine, that no parent needs to choose between working or accompanying a child's treatment, that no young life is lost due to lack of resources or support." As he finished the speech, he felt his granddaughter's small hand squeeze his. He looked at her, worried that the event might be tiring her. "Can I say something?" she whispered. Surprised, he nodded and adjusted the microphone to her height. "Hi," she began with a clear and firm voice that surprised everyone. "My name is..." She said her name, the same as her father. "And a year ago I had no hope left. Now I have a family, I'm getting better, and I want all children like me to have the same chance." She looked at her grandfather with shining eyes. My grandpa saved me, but not all children have a millionaire grandpa. That's why we need this place. Because every child deserves someone who looks at them and says, "You matter, I'll fight with you." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience when she finished. The millionaire, overflowing with pride, bent down and hugged her tight. No longer the man who avoided physical contact and displays of emotion, but someone completely transformed by love. Later, after the excitement of the inauguration, they walked together through the park adjacent to the institute. The girl, tired but happy, held her grandfather's hand as she watched other children playing in the distance. "You know what else I miss from the time I used to sell flowers?" she asked suddenly. "What?" he inquired, curious. "The freedom of walking alone, of talking to strangers, of simply existing without everyone knowing who I am." He understood immediately. The media, the sudden exposure, the stares, everything that had been part of his life for decades was new and sometimes suffocating for her. "We can change that," he offered. "We could move to the countryside or even to another country, start over, where no one knows us." She reflected for a moment, then shook her head. "No, the institute is here. The kids who need help are here." She smiled. "Besides, I think we need to stay to remind people." "Remind them of what?" "That everyone can change, even an angry millionaire who throws flowers on the ground." He laughed, a sound that used to be rare, but that now brightened his days frequently. "Lesson learned. I haven't thrown a flower on the ground since then." "And you never will again," she completed with a decided tone. "Because now you know." "Know what?" "That flowers are like people. Even crumpled, even fallen in the rain, they can still change everything." The millionaire looked at his granddaughter, the child who had arrived in his life like a crumpled flower and who now bloomed fully, bringing color to a world that he had previously seen only in shades of gray. He realized then the profound truth in her words. It wasn't he who had saved her. It was she who had rescued him. "Shall we go home?" he invited, feeling a deep gratitude for the future that now stretched before them. A future uncertain in many respects, but absolutely secure in what mattered most. They were together. "Let's go," she agreed, resting her head on his arm as they walked. "I have a lot of flowers to plant in the garden tomorrow." As they walked away, the setting sun cast a golden glow on both of them. The transformed millionaire and his miraculous granddaughter. Two souls united not only by blood, but by something much more powerful. The ability to see beauty where others saw only fragility, to offer love when it would be easier to turn away, to believe in renewal even in the darkest moments. And somewhere, perhaps, the absent Sun Father smiled upon the unlikely journey that had united the two beings he loved most in the world. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the millionaire's place? Comment below and share this story with someone special.